Police emergency, this is Tammy. Where do you need the police, please?
An Angelo Street woman at the water. We found a body in the water.
Okay, just stay on the phone with me. Getting the police on the way as we're talking, okay? Just stay on the phone. You don't know who this person is? No?
Because my husband's so sad. I'm holding my gun and the body is floating up my house. I still think it's a woman.
A young woman? Yeah.
I'm just so sick for the family.
Christine Bird and her husband had just put their kayaks in for a quick Sunday morning paddle around the Sydney waterways when they came across a woman's body. They were in the Woolwich suburb of Sydney near Angelo Street around 10:15 in the morning. As Christine called 000, the Australian emergency number, her husband worked to bring the body back to shore. The body was face down and just barely floating above the waterline when they found it. They were able to turn it over and bring it in. During the initial assessment of the body, police forensic officers would find gym weights had been stuffed into the pockets of the corpse's khaki cargo pants in an attempt to keep the body submerged. The person's death could be no accident, and work began immediately by local law enforcement to identify the body. Who was this young woman? Why had her body been dumped into the Lane Cove River? And of course, who had done it? The first question was the quickest to answer for Sydney investigators. Before we begin, we would like to send our deepest sympathies to the loved ones of Cecilia Haddad, who fell victim to the events in this case. Cecilia Haddad was a 38-year-old Brazilian native who had immigrated to Australia years earlier to work for the Billiton BHP, a major mining concern. In 2016, she had come to the country and settled in Perth in Western Australia. There, she quickly made friends among the sizable number of Brazilian immigrants. Australia has, in recent decades, welcomed immigrants from around the world to bolster its workforce as their economy grew at a rapid pace. The first wave of Brazilian immigrants came in the mid-1970s, attracted by economic conditions created by the government assistance scheme. 2 decades later, as Brazil's economy grew and they became more involved in international trade, another wave of immigrants came to Australia, many seeking education and opportunities to leverage their language skills in the job market. Cecilia was a graduate of the Pontifical Catholic University of Rio de Janeiro and held both bachelor's and master's degrees. She was fluent in Portuguese, Spanish, and English, and was a natural when it came to business. She would go on to receive additional accreditations from the Melbourne Business School and the University of Tasmania after arriving in Australia. During her time in Perth, Cecilia led a busy life as she built a career for herself and a large circle of friends. She led a very active lifestyle, volunteering extensively, having a short-lived marriage that ended in divorce. She would keep contact with many of her friends that she had made there, even after moving all the way across Australia to Sydney in New South Wales for job opportunities. In the following years, she would spend time traveling back to see friends anytime she could and talking with a number of them almost daily. She had taken a job with Pacific National in Sydney and made the most of her time there, not just growing within the company, but leveraging her expertise in industrial and international logistics to create her own separate business, CHC Consulting. During this time, she had even been called on to be a speaker at the Women in Roads, Rail and Transport Leadership Summit in 2017. She settled in the Ryde suburb of Sydney, taking a nice apartment on St. Anne Street, not far from the waterways and the coves that make up the large Sydney Harbour area. She also continued to work within the community upon reaching Sydney. She volunteered as a fundraiser for the Heart Kids Foundation and as a support worker for the disability service higher up. Somehow she found time to fall in love and start a relationship. In 2017, she met a man, Mario Marcelo Santoro, and the two hit it off quickly. He was also a professional who had come from Rio de Janeiro. He worked as an engineer and seemed successful as well. Their shared interests and background made them a good match. The two traveled together and seemed to have a very good time with each other. That is, until they didn't. As relationships sometimes do, theirs didn't seem to work out. Cecilia confided in her friends on a visit back to Perth that the relationship wasn't what she wanted it to be, and Santoro was not long-term material. What she told them of his actions made them request that she end the relationship and send him packing. Her friends, Carol Kamara and Rita Marasil, would later say Cecilia had told them that she didn't fear Santoro and that there would be no way he would ever hurt her. In May of 2018, after a couple of rocky weeks between the two of them, Cecilia told Santoro that they were done. She asked for the key to her apartment back and told him it was time they went their separate ways. Santoro didn't take it well. He apparently had become much more attracted to Cecilia than she wanted to admit. As she pushed him away, he tried again and again to get back in her good graces. What had been an attempt to keep the relationship evolved into him pleading for another chance, and that soon became arguments, and then stalking began. The previously held idea that he would never harm her began to fade, and Cecilia began spending nights at the homes of friends in Sydney or at hotels. Feeling that he was constantly spying on her, Cecilia began making stops at her home short and rarely turned on the lights so as not to alert him that she was home. He would know, though, and it was probable that for this period of time he spent more time in her apartment than she did. He could because he had made a key for himself. What he would later do in her apartment while she was gone is unknown, but he did slip up a time or two and left things out of place after having been there. Cecilia would find the changes and let her friends know. They urged her to go to the police, but she didn't. When she confronted Santoro about it, he let her know that he was done and he was going home, back to Rio de Janeiro. Perhaps he realized that he had gone far past the limits of sane behavior. Maybe he wanted to get away from the breakup that was torturing him. Maybe it was just another ploy for sympathy and attention. Either way, he asked Cecilia for one last favor. Would she take him to the airport on Sunday, May the 29th? He would be heading home and would be out of her hair for good. With that in mind, she told him that she would do it. Her friends would later say that they told her that she was wrong to volunteer in this case, but she had told them that she needed to do so. She needed to see the back of him as he left her life so that she could slam the door shut on that relationship and get back to her own life. On Friday, May the 27th, Cecilia spent the afternoon and evening at a barbecue with some friends. They laughed, had fun, and enjoyed themselves immensely. She'd gone home, back to her apartment that night, and slept well. The next morning, she would spend the time between 8 a.m. and 9:30 on the phone and texting with her friends, both those local to Sydney and those back in Perth. She made some plans for later in the day, including meeting one of her disabled clients that she volunteered with. She never showed up. She stopped returning calls and texts. The ultra-reliable friend, co-worker, and volunteer wasn't available. She was gone. Hi folks, we'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsor for this episode. Factor can put fresh, flavorful meals at your fingertips. We recently received one of their Chef Choice selections that included 5 fantastic meals and 4 bottles of cold-pressed juices. Our selection of meals arrived cold-packed and ready to go. In just 2 minutes in the microwave, you're enjoying a top-quality, fresh meal. Each of the meals, whether those are grilled meats or vegetarian fare, are excellent with crisp vegetables and excellent sauces. The juices were fresh and flavorful and packed with nutrition. Try their delicious, dietitian-approved Calorie Smart meals with around 550 calories or less. Check out their Protein Plus menu for other healthy options as well. They even offer Gourmet Plus options with high-end ingredients like asparagus, leeks, and truffle butter. They also have breakfast options that are bright and tasty ways to start your day. There are even 45 plus add-ons to help solve your snack cravings. Give them a try and really up your quick meal game. Head over to factor75.com or click the link below and use the code BeyondEvil50 and get 50% off your first Factor box. Her mother would receive a WhatsApp message from Cecilia that day saying that she was going to head off to the Blue Mountains for a little getaway and would get back in touch with her when she returned home. The text, as it turns out, was not sent by Cecilia, but instead by Santoro using her phone. Cecilia was no longer alive by that time.
My sweet Milu, my WhatsApp isn't good. I haven't come across Polka, a nickname for Mario Santoro.
Milu was the name by which Cecilia called her mother. Polka was the name for Santoro, a word that in Portuguese means puddle. The next contact the outside world would have with Cecilia would be on that fateful Sunday morning when Christine Bird and her husband discovered her body floating in the Lane Cove River.
Cecilia Haddad, de 38 anos, foi encontrada morta em rio da região norte da cidade de Sydney, na Austrália. O local onde o corpo foi achado fica a apenas 6 quilômetros da casa da empresária.
The body was recovered and a murder investigation began immediately, led by the New South Wales police detectives John Edwards and Hannah Baker. As a person well known in the community, identifying Cecilia's body did not take long. Investigators quickly checked with her friends and neighbors, trying to find any leads as to who may have killed her and why. Friends and family immediately pointed fingers at Mario Marcello Santoro, and they all gave details of the relationship as they understood it. One critical piece of information came just hours too late, though, as Cecilia's friends from Perth told investigators that Santoro was supposed to be heading back to Brazil that very day. As Cecilia's body was recovered, identified, and the loved ones were notified, Santoro calmly made his way through the airport in Sydney. He had checked in and boarded the plane and was out of the country and over the ocean before she had ever been found. This created an immensely difficult dilemma for Australian police. Had Santoro been in Australia, they simply could have arrested him and brought him in for questioning as their investigation developed. Once he was out of their jurisdiction, there wasn't an immediate course of action for them to take. Time and distance would shield Santoro for a while. Further complicating matters was one particular article in the Brazilian Constitution. While many nations hold permanent extradition treaties between each other or have provisions to create temporary ones, Brazil's constitution specifically forbids it from extraditing anyone to another country under any circumstances. After World War II, a number of accused war criminals made use of that provision to avoid prosecution. Santoro would benefit from this to a degree, but some would argue that in the end it would make things worse for him. While Brazil won't extradite, they will arrest and prosecute accused criminals on behalf of another nation in these situations. But the case must be made in Brazilian courts. Australian police detectives Edwards and Baker knew they had to put together an airtight evidence packet to provide to Brazilian authorities. They went straight to work on it and pieced together a very solid bundle of evidence and testimonies. One of the first clues to what had happened that they were able to track down was Cecilia's very distinctive car, a red Fiat 300. It stood out when people saw it in the area and neighborhoods, and the neighbors were able to remember seeing it at the apartment on Saturday morning, but not later in the evening. And after police had been informed of the WhatsApp message about heading to the Blue Mountains, it was just a short leap to check the nearby West Ryde railway station, and the car was quickly found in the station's commuter parking lot. Investigators were also able to get records for both Cecilia's and Santoro's cell phones. As one group went through her text and call records to look for clues and information, another group began mapping the pings from local cell towers on the phone, his phone specifically. They were able to quickly get the pattern of his movements on that fateful Saturday morning. Then they matched those pings with CCTV cameras and other surveillance systems in the area until they found video of Santoro, his movements, and where the car had gone. It began around 7:30 that Saturday morning with Santoro walking up to Cecilia's apartment. He creeps around the area for a bit. He is then spotted in a store buying some food and moving about the area. He returns to her apartment, goes in, and we have no further information except for the WhatsApp communications that were sent through her phone. Investigators surmised that during this time he strangled her and then used her finger to unlock the phone. He then created the mountain trip cover story and made preparations to dispose of her body. Next, the red Fiat comes into play again as Santoro uses it to take her body away from the scene of the crime. The cell phone pings and CCTV coverage shows that he drove around the entire area in the Woolwich suburb before finally stopping near the Lane Cove River. Footage would show him returning to the car just after dumping the body in the nearby river. His wet, bare footprints can even be seen briefly in the video. A pair of shoes owned by Santoro would be found at the riverside spot where he had disposed of her. He moves around the town for a bit more, buying a bottle of wine before heading to the train station to ditch the car. He then walks back to the place where he had been staying. Unbeknownst to Santoro, there was a CCTV camera that had been installed to watch over the courtyard of the home that he had been staying in. It captures him removing his clothes right down to the underwear and then throwing them into a washing machine before turning in for the night. The next morning, the same CCTV system catches him leaving home, suitcase in hand. He hires an Uber to take him to the airport, and his getaway is almost complete. The Uber ride would end up being a very important part of this case. Using the video and checking with the ride-sharing company, they were able to identify which driver had picked him up. The driver had a very clear recollection of the man and his very unusual request. Santoro, he said, had asked him to cross over the Gladesville Bridge on the way to the airport. The bridge, which crosses the Parramatta River, rises some 148 feet above the water below and features 6 lanes for traffic and tall safety fences on either side of its length. As they got to the bridge, Santoro asked him to take the most left-hand lane in the road. He did, and as the vehicle got near the peak of the bridge, Santoro rolled down his window and threw something out and over the safety fence. When asked what he thought had been thrown out, the driver said it was keys, and he remarked on how good of a throw he was to get them above the safety fence. It would take police divers 3 weeks of searching under the bridge before they found the key set. Not only the Fiat key that worked in her car, but also a very distinctive key fob souvenir from the Christ the Redeemer statue in Rio de Janeiro. With the evidence collected, authorities in Rio were presented with a case being made by Detectives Edwards and Baker. On July 7, 2018, Santoro was arrested by local police and charged with femicide.
3 months after she was killed, Brazilian police arrested Marcelo Santoro and charged him with the murder of Cecilia Haddad. Take another 4 years before Santoro's trial was heard in June this year. Remarkably, over just 2 days.
Santoro would be brought into court for pretrial motions. He pled innocent and his attorneys settled into the long process of creating a defense for him. His attorneys argued first that Australian police had not at that time provided enough evidence to create a case for arresting the man, telling newscasters that the arrest itself was illegal.
Cecilia Haddad was found floating in the Lane Cove River in April.
This is a stack of evidence prosecutors hope will convict Mario Santoro of murder. His lawyers aren't convinced.
We haven't received the evidence from Australia, so from a defence point of view, Mr. Santoro has been wrongfully in prison.
Judge Daniel Cotta felt differently and remanded Santoro over to await trial in jail. In the meantime, the Brazilian government weighed a request for alternative tactics that might allow Santoro to stand trial in Australia instead. While Santoro had been born in Rio de Janeiro, his passport was actually one issued from the country of Italy. It was argued that by that document, it would be considered possible that Santoro was liable to have his Brazilian citizenship stripped away, along with its extradition protections. In the end, it was decided that while clever, such a move would set a precedent that would be at odds with the intent of the Brazilian Constitution. He would remain a Brazilian citizen subject to its laws and protections and would be tried in its courts. The decision probably made life much harder on Santoro, though, as he was sent for holding at the Benfica prison in Rio de Janeiro. A notoriously overcrowded prison, Benfica was the site of a 2004 prison riot that left some 30 inmates dead. As prisons in Brazil go, it had long been considered a hellhole. Santoro would spend almost 4 years in that prison before his case finally came to trial. The duo of Australian detectives were told that once the case came before a judge, trials moved quickly and they could expect a judgment to be made within 1 or 2 days after the testimony began. On the first attempt to start the trial, though, Santoro threw a monkey wrench into the proceedings by announcing that he had just fired his defense team.
Shuffled in by armed guards to the front of Rio's federal court. It's been years since Australia has seen accused killer Marcelo Santoro, and today, dressed in casual clothes, he delivered a serious blow.
Additional time would be needed to allow him to get a new defense team together. He was sent back to Benfica prison. Something must have happened there, and Santoro had a massive change of heart. He would speak with both his priest and some of the guards there, intimating that he might confess to the crime. On June 21st, Santoro was brought back into court for his trial. Cecilia's family and friends turned out, some wearing white t-shirts emblazoned with her photo on them. Some spoke to the media outside the courtroom. Others who still lived in Australia would testify before the court through video conference.
Ela já tinha ajudado em tudo, não precisava ajudar em mais nada. Ela só queria ir fora do apartamento. Ele não saiu do apartamento.
Detectives Edwards and Packer would also take part in the trial. And then, during the first day of testimony, Santoro emotionally broke down and admitted to murdering Cecilia.
E me disse que estrangulou a ex-namorada no momento de transtorno.
Arrependido. Foi assim que Marcelo se apresentou no tribunal. O engenheiro chorou durante o depoimento e pediu perdão à família de Cecília.
Por isso que eu peço, eu sei que perdoar não faz esquecer, mas cura.
Apesar da confissão, Marcelo Santoro rebateu alegações feitas no júri. Negou que era sustentado pela vítima.
He would tell the court that he had gone to her apartment uninvited on that fateful Saturday morning to get his passport from her. The two had argued, and that he had reached out and grabbed her around the neck and squeezed it until she fell back. He couldn't say whether she had hit her head on the way down or anything like that, but she was dead right then and there. He admitted to disposing of her body after weighing it down and knowingly fleeing the country.
O engenheiro afirmou que ficou transtornado no meio da discussão e fugiu para o Brasil por não saber o que fazer. Versão que a família de Cecília não aceita.
Ficamos, assim, muito emocionados e chocados de ver a disfarçatez dele e a frieza que ele tem de chorar ali. E no instante seguinte ele parou de chorar. Deu pra ver que foi tudo falsidade dele, todo aquele choro, fingindo de se arrepender do que fez.
A sentença será decidida por um júri popular e o resultado deve sair ainda hoje por volta das 10 da noite.
The trial was quickly put to the jury for a decision, and while they deliberated, her brother spoke to reporters, expressing the sadness their family had been left with. In the end, the jury of 7, 6 women and 1 man, would find him guilty of murder and attempting to conceal the body. Mario Marcelo Santoro would receive a sentence of 22 years for the murder of Cecilia Haddad and an additional 5 years for the concealment charge. Santoro was returned to Benfica prison to serve out his sentence. If you found this case compelling, don't forget to like the video. Comment down below your take on it, and please subscribe to the channel. Also, hit the notification bell in order to stay up to date each time we reveal a new shocking case. Until next time, stay safe and keep your eyes peeled. You never know what's lurking in the shadows.